Hello again to all my friends out there in YouTube land. I'm Dakian. It is Monday, the 8th of May, 2017. And once again, I'm bringing you my latest update on painted and prepped and planned miniatures. First off, I already finished off these agents. I mean, I've been painting so many cultists lately that I need some forces for good to go hunt them down. So we have these gas-masked agents from Blind Beggar Miniatures, and let me pan over them. There's a total of 10 of them. 5 men and 5 women. And I've painted them, well, I started out thinking these are men in black, but just plain black is too boring, so how about men and women in blue? A dark blue. That'll do fine for their suits. Then I thought they have these kind of vest things they're wearing. Most obviously the women. They have these big tool belts, and they also have these sort of things over their clothes. They have to be something different. The men are not quite as obvious, but it is present in some of them. So I thought, let's paint that a contrasting color. And I started out with a bright orange, but I thought, ooh, this looks like a life vest. It looks like some sort of inflatable thing to keep you afloat in the water. So I toned it down. I made paler highlights and then some brown shading. And so now it looks like kind of orangish brown instead, which I think works better. I'll turn these around so you can see the back of them. This guy doesn't, he's just wearing a suit. He has none of this vest stuff. And it might look a little bit cartoony, but hey, these sculpts, all of the Blind Beggar miniatures, they are cartoony as heck. That's their kind of style. So these bright colors, I think, work well for that. Anyway, that was a sort of unit mass production line painting. I also have a few more individual minis that I've finished off. I have also finished a few more carefully painted models. The 2 detectives. We have the professor and the, I suppose he's a Sikh, pulp adventurer. And I'm relatively pleased with how these turned out, at least at this distance. Now, I had a little bit of an accident while varnishing them. My can of spray varnish was acting up, and that led to a bit of accidental frosting that I think I've mostly fixed. I'm not sure if you can see any remains of it, hopefully. Oh, right, yeah, I can see here I need to touch up his face a bit. That does not look good, but there we go, all better. It's just the coat was messed up a bit and I couldn't remix exactly the same colors, but at a little bit of a distance you can't really tell. So thankfully I painted him pretty dark. That's easier to fix. Now on this one, the gray highlights are not as smooth as I would have liked because the paint I was using to lighten my base tone had gone a bit chalky on me, and that meant when I brushed it on, the brush strokes look a bit well, chalky. But again, I I try to fix that by a wash to glaze over it and to soften it a little bit. And hopefully, again, you can't really tell. Now, Professor Felicity Poppington here is in a sort of military green outfit. I was testing out the green I'm going to use on my US GIs that you'll see later. And yeah, not much to say about her. It's kind of a subdued model. She's investigating something, so she shouldn't stand out so much. Finally, this guy. I painted him 2 different tones of blue. One for the turban and one for the coat. And some accent colors. Again, the sash started out as kind of a bright orange, but I toned it down because it looked too garish. Yeah. Overall, good job. Let's see.
On to work in progress. Well, I still have these 2 ladies left to do, and what's done on them is mainly the skin tones and the hair, and it looks like I've base coated everything else, and I suppose I have, but it's very early. It's not final. I mean, yeah, I mean, this dusty page here is going to have some kind of blue pants and a leather coat, but I'm not sure it's going to wind up exactly that color. And as this orange for her robe, I don't know. We'll just have to figure that out. The big thing is these American GIs. Now, they're not only prepped, they have in fact gotten base coats. I've done something that I don't usually do these days with miniatures. Normally I paint one section of a miniature at a time. I base coat it and or shade and layer up, or you know, whatever method I'm using. I do one part at a time. But for these guys, I just didn't have any clear idea of a color scheme, so I wanted to test it out by laying out all the colors to begin with. Now, when looking at reference for this, there seems to have been quite a lot of variation during World War II in what American soldiers wore, but the majority would wear everything in one color. It would be something tan, like the pants color, or the color I've used for the straps and pouches. And that would be the whole uniform, everything just monochromatic. And I'm sure that's efficient in real life, but for miniatures it looks boring. But I did find some pictures where they would have a pale green on either the jacket or the pants. Most commonly the pants, but since there was the option of the jacket, it does appear in some pictures. I decided to go with that because it provides the best contrast. It means that I can differentiate between the straps and the jacket, for example, by having them different colors. So this is what I've done, and I've, as you can see, base coated everything. It's time to shade and highlight. Now for the models themselves, I have to complain a little bit. I mean, I didn't find them up to Reaper's usual snuff, usual standards, because the sculpting of particularly the faces is not all that awesome, and the casting is kind of rough in places. This model, hopefully you can't really tell, but if I tell you to look very closely at his shoulders and how they are sloping, you might notice they're way too wide for a human. He looks like a orangutan or a gorilla or something. And the reason for that is that I had to do a tremendous amount of gap filling because the arms were separate pieces that had to be assembled, and they did not fit very well at all. Hopefully you won't notice that on the tabletop. And the final thing is that they're not of a consistent scale. I mean, they are all from the chronoscope range, which sometimes is a little bit larger in scale than the normal fancy, what's it called? I forgot what the normal range is called. Anyway, but the scale is slightly inconsistent between some of these guys. Not enough to be noticeable on the tabletop again, but as you're assembling them and looking very closely at them, you can't help but notice. So, not great work, Reaper, with these modern day minis. But, you know, I'm gonna make it work. So, with this much progress done on everything, this is everything unpainted I have sort of left since last week, I've got to start up some new projects. So to continue the theme of World War II, I have more Reaper miniatures, this time from the other side, the German side, and these guys are all zombies. So we have 3 zombie soldiers here, a zombie officer, a Nazi zombie officer, not just German, and another 2 soldiers, and a zombie leader. Now, this is just 8 minis, so I'm thinking as side projects, I'm going to go into these, start going into these War Games Illustrated Giants Adventure Limited Editions. Some of these are World War II. For example, this is Ramble. I think I've shown you this guy before. He's World War II era, and I believe we have an American lieutenant colonel here. He looks kind of World War II, maybe slightly later, in some sort of camouflage. And some are kind of Lord Kitchener is a bit earlier. I think he's World War I era, maybe? I don't quite recall my history there. Trotsky is kind of early 20th century, World War I, 1920s. And there's more of these guys. There's 8 total in the series, some of which are not actually from the era I'm currently painting. There's one of Napoleon here somewhere, for example, another Julius Caesar. But yeah, I'll get started on prepping these and painting them anyway, because they'll be fun projects. And then in today's show, I'm going to show you the arrival of not just 1, but 2 whole Kickstarters. The first of which isn't actually made. It's bases. A lot of bases. Oops. This is a project for wooden bases, and the reason I backed it is for 2 reasons. One, these larger bases. These I intend for really large minis, because I have some models that are just huge lumps of metal, some old, for example, Reaper minis. Like I have a T-Rex, which is entirely metal, and I could use something like this for it. Because I do have some really big plastic bases, but the problem with plastic is if you have heavy stuff, like metal models, I'm concerned about how well that thin plastic will hold up. Some solid wood seems like a better bet. That's one use. The other is these somewhat thicker but smaller bases. I intend these as plinths for models that are more for display than for gaming. I like to raise those up slightly higher. And
This bag contains a few odds and ends, like, well, this is definitely a plinth of some sort, and some, I don't know what this is, and some smaller stuff. I have honestly not been bothered to go through all this. I know I should, to make sure that I got everything that's in the order, but there's just so much stuff here. It would, I'm just gonna trust that it's all here and say, yeah, I trust you. Anyway, not terribly exciting, but useful. The other Kickstarter I got is actually miniatures. As you can perhaps tell, it's another set from Midland Miniatures, one of my favorite companies to back on Kickstarter. And this time it's for some cultists. These kind of might remind you a little bit of those cultists I recently painted from Blind Beggar, with the one of those had that tentacle face. These look like they're mind flayers or something. However, I think I'm going to save these for fantasy use. I mean, you can't really tell if you paint these up whether they are modern day or fantasy. I mean, the only way they have things like staffs and knives and whatever, no modern weaponry. But the main way I differentiate my models is the kind of basis. I don't know if I've mentioned this before or if you've noticed a pattern, but stuff that I paint which is kind of like from Victorian era or steampunk up through First and Second World War, I put those on those kind of lipped bases, the 30mm round bases. While anything older, fantasy, medieval, and also future and sci-fi stuff, I use these normal round 25mm bases. And the reason I've come to do that is mostly accidental, well, historical. It's just that some games I've played from those eras, the Victorian eras, like for example, Malifaux used the 30mm bases, and so I just thought for consistency, if I'm painting something from that kind of setting, I'll use the same kinds of bases. Whereas for fantasy, I've always done the standard bases, and so I thought, well, I might as well continue doing that. Again, just for consistency with my previously painted stuff. And there's a few exceptions. I mean, I've made exceptions in a few cases and used different kinds of bases, but overall, it's not a law. It's just a kind of a general rule of thumb. Anyway, you're not going to see me paint these for a while, not until I get back into fantasy painting, because I already have plenty of cultists for Call of Cthulhu. I don't really need any more. And, you know, my players won't know. If I do paint them up, eventually I can throw them into a Call of Cthulhu game, even though they have the sort of wrong kinds of bases. My players won't notice. In any case, that was this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll show that by clicking like and subscribing to my channel, maybe even commenting. In any case, I'll see you next week. Till then, I'm Dakian, signing off.